The committee chamber was already brimming with tension, every seat occupied, cameras positioned like silent sentinels along the walls. But the quiet hum of procedural monotony shattered when Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly forward, her voice cutting through the air like the crack of a whip. Without a flicker of hesitation, she said, "Mr. Trump, perhaps you'd like to explain the ongoing Federal Bureau of Investigation probe into your activities." It was not just a question. It was an indictment wrapped in velvet, flung across the polished wooden table with surgical precision. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. Donald Trump's head snapped toward her, the muscles in his jaw tightening. His eyes widened, then narrowed, a rapid sequence of shock, calculation, and thinly veiled anger. He didn't speak immediately, and that pause was more damning than any rebuttal could have been. Cameras zoomed in instinctively, locking on to his face. The audience watching live across the country saw it, the exact moment the accusation landed. His face said it all. Murmurs rippled through the gallery like a wave crashing onto shore. One reporter dropped his pen, fumbling for his phone to send out the quote before the echo even faded. Members of the committee glanced at one another, some with disbelief, others with the faintest trace of satisfaction. Trump finally broke the silence, his voice a low growl that quickly rose in volume. "This is fake news, absolute garbage, a political witch hunt, and you know it." But the force in his tone could not erase the way his expression had already been seared into the public consciousness. Crockett didn't flinch. She rested her palms flat on the table, leaning in just enough to make it clear she wasn't intimidated. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind of silence that screams louder than any words. Then, like the sudden eruption of a fault line, the room exploded into overlapping voices, journalists shouting questions, aides moving in to whisper hurried advice, and the gavel of the chairperson pounding in vain. But the damage was done. The phrase secret FBI probe was out in the open, echoing into every microphone, bouncing into every living room tuned to the live feed. In that instant, the political theater transformed into a battlefield. Crockett had drawn first blood, and the cameras had caught every detail. The chaos from the previous exchange had barely settled when Jasmine Crockett reached for the thick manila folder beside her. The movement was deliberate, slow enough for every camera in the room to track. She pulled out a stack of papers, crisp, official, each page stamped with a red, classified header, and parts of the text blacked out with heavy blocks of ink. She slid the top sheet across the table toward the clerk, her gaze never leaving Trump. "For the record," she said evenly, "this is an excerpt from an internal memorandum of the Federal Bureau of Investigation dated 8 months ago. It names you, Mr. Trump, as the subject of an ongoing inquiry." Gasps rose from the press section. Phones came out instantly. The photographers began firing off shots in rapid succession, capturing the grainy photocopy like it was evidence in a trial, which, in the court of public opinion, it now was. Trump leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles blanched. "That's a fake. It's fabricated. Everyone knows the FBI has been weaponized against me for years," he shot back, his voice booming to drown out any hint of vulnerability. He pointed at the paper as if it were a personal insult. "This is another one of your cheap stunts, Crockett. You think you can score points by waving around some prop." But Crockett wasn't done. She gestured to the document again. "The signatures on this memo belong to senior agents whose names are not redacted. The dates align with events corroborated by multiple whistleblowers. If you're calling this fake, you're also calling those agents liars, on the record, under oath. For a split second, Trump's lips parted as if to respond, but the hesitation gave away more than he intended. A few committee members shifted uncomfortably, while others seemed to be silently savoring the moment. The chairperson's gavel cracked against the block. Order! The witness will answer the question. Instead of answering, Trump leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his eyes darting to his legal counsel seated just behind him. They exchanged a quick whisper, the kind of conversation that said more through its urgency than any public statement could. Crockett didn't press further. Not yet. She knew the power of letting an unanswered accusation linger in the air. It was a move designed to make the silence feel heavier with every passing second. Meanwhile, in the hall outside, reporters were already live streaming hurried updates. The phrase, internal FBI memo, had joined secret FBI probe as the new headline hook. Trump's denial was loud, but the paper on the table, tangible, photographed, already making the rounds online, was louder. It took less than 60 seconds for the chamber's walls to become irrelevant. Outside, the moment was already detonating across the digital landscape. In newsrooms from New York to Los Angeles, producers were barking orders to pull the live feed, isolate the clip, and push it to every platform before the hour was out. The footage was irresistible, Crockett leaning forward with clinical precision, uttering the phrase, ongoing FBI probe, while Trump's face betrayed a flicker of panic before his voice roared back in protest. No flashy graphics, no editing tricks, just raw, unfiltered political theater. The kind that doesn't need context to make an impact. Within minutes, the clip hit Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. By the time the committee was still in session, the hashtag #FBI probe trend was climbing toward the top slot. Influencers, political commentators, and late-night hosts all seemed to post within the same breath. Some looped the exact moment Trump's expression shifted, zooming in frame by frame, freezing it at the point where his confidence faltered. Others paired it with sarcastic captions like, "When you realize the FBI is in the room with you." Cable networks split their screens. On one side, the ongoing committee proceedings. On the other, pundits already dissecting the verbal grenade Crockett had lobbed. A panel on MSNBC ran the footage 4 times in 10 minutes, each replay accompanied by slow-motion breakdowns and expert commentary on micro-expressions. By early evening, CNN's Chiron read, "Secret FBI probe, Trump responds to bombshell allegation." Fox News countered with, "Dems launch new smear campaign during committee hearing." But even their clips had to show the moment. And the moment spoke louder than any spin. Social media wasn't just watching, it was remixing. Someone added dramatic movie score music to the clip. Another account looped Trump's pause before speaking, making it stretch into an awkward eternity. Memes bloomed like wildfire. Still shots of Crockett with captions like, "Checkmate," or "Your move, Donald." In living rooms and office break rooms, people were watching on phones, laptops, and TVs, whispering the same question. Was that real? The grainy photo of the redacted memo, already screenshotted and reposted thousands of times, was convincing enough to make the denial sound like desperation. Inside the chamber, Trump pretended to ignore the phones lighting up in the gallery. But the glow of the screens reflected in his eyes told another story. Crockett, meanwhile, sat composed, letting the outside world do the work for her. Every share, every replay, every sarcastic comment was adding weight to her accusation without her saying another word. This wasn't just a headline anymore. It was a political wildfire. And it had been lit live, on camera, with nowhere for the flames to go but wider. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn the session, the room fractured into a blur of movement. Aides rushing to collect documents, reporters spilling into the hallway, and camera crews breaking down their gear while still keeping lenses trained on the key players. Trump moved quickly toward the exit, his legal team forming a protective wedge around him, but not fast enough to avoid the shouted questions that chased him down the corridor. Behind closed doors, the temperature changed. In a windowless side room reserved for committee witnesses, Trump sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, speaking in a rapid, low tone to his lawyers. "We kill this now," he said, jabbing a finger at the table. "Every outlet, every platform, we get them to pull it, call in the favors, make it disappear." His voice was more controlled now, but the sharp edge in it made the urgency clear. Meanwhile, on the other side of the building, Jasmine Crockett lingered at her desk, quietly stacking the papers she'd revealed. She wasn't in a rush. The hallway beyond her office was already thick with reporters, microphones poised, but she stayed seated, answering a single phone call. The voice on the other end was gravelly, familiar, an old ally from her years in legal advocacy. "You rattled him," the voice said without introduction, "but you need to know. They're going to try to bury you under counterattacks. Watch your back, Jasmine, and don't go anywhere alone for a while." She let the words sink in. This wasn't the first warning she'd ever received, but the tone carried weight. This was more than political bluster. Downstairs, in the Capitol's marble-lined lobby, fragments of conversation between Trump's aides slipped into the air like smoke from a fire. One was overheard saying, "We'll clean the feeds, get our people on TikTok, YouTube, all of it. We drown her clip in noise." Another, speaking into a phone with a hand over his mouth, murmured about contacting the right folks at the Bureau to get ahead of this. By the time Crockett finally emerged into the hallway, flashes from cameras lit up the space like a strobe. A reporter yelled a question about the authenticity of the memo. She answered with a half smile and a single line. "Ask him why he hesitated before answering." That soundbite would join the viral rotation within minutes. Back outside in the thick August heat, Trump climbed into the back of a black SUV, slamming the door so hard the driver flinched. His motorcade pulled away from the Capitol, trailed by a convoy of media vans. Somewhere between the building and his hotel, he took a call. The contact name hidden from the camera's angle. He listened without interruption, then simply said, "Do it. Tonight." In Washington, moves like that never stayed secret for long. By the next morning, the counteroffensive was in full swing. Trump's team had booked every available slot on conservative talk radio, cable news, and friendly podcasts. The narrative was sharp and simple. Jasmine Crockett had staged a dishonest political stunt using fake documents to smear the former president in a live hearing. At a hastily arranged press conference at the Trump International Hotel, the former president walked onto the stage flanked by allies, congressmen, former cabinet members, and a few firebrand pundits who thrived on confrontation. The backdrop was adorned with oversized American flags, a deliberate framing to cast himself as the embattled patriot. Trump stepped to the podium, scanning the crowd of reporters. "Yesterday was a disgrace," he began, his voice heavy with indignation. "What you saw was a coordinated attack, Democrats using taxpayer-funded committees to peddle lies. Jasmine Crockett has no evidence. She has no credibility, and I will not be intimidated. He jabbed a finger toward the media row. That so-called memo, it's a forgery. The FBI would never put my name in something like that because I've done nothing wrong. They weaponized law enforcement against me before, and they're doing it again. The applause from his supporters in the room was immediate, loud enough to briefly drown out the questions being shouted. But the relief was short-lived. While the press conference was still underway, a push alert from an independent investigative outlet lit up phones across the room. The headline was surgical. Source confirms authenticity of Crockett's FBI memo. Signatures match bureau records. Within minutes, MSNBC and CNN interrupted their broadcasts to report on the confirmation. A whistleblower, described only as a current law enforcement official, had verified that the document Crockett revealed was indeed part of an active internal investigation. Reporters in the press conference began pressing harder, their questions slicing through the staged rhetoric. Mr. Trump, how do you respond to the verification of the memo's authenticity? Trump's jaw tightened. I haven't seen what you're talking about, he said, sidestepping. And if it's true, then it's part of the same corrupt system that's been out to get me for years. But the optics were already shifting. Side-by-side clips began circulating online, Trump dismissing the memo as a fake on one screen, and the breaking news chyron verifying its authenticity on the other. The juxtaposition was brutal. That evening, late-night hosts pounced. One opened his monologue with the line, "When your alibi doesn't survive lunchtime, maybe it wasn't that great to begin with." The audience roared. By sunrise, the counterattack had boomeranged. The same press conference meant to discredit Crockett had given her claim more airtime and more credibility than she could have bought with a $1 million ad campaign. 2 days after the hearing, Jasmine Crockett walked up the stone steps of the Capitol, flanked by a small group of aides, each carrying thick binders. The sky was a crisp, cloudless blue, the kind of day that photographers love. And every lens in D.C. seemed to be aimed at her. This wasn't another hearing. This was the escalation. Inside, the House press gallery buzzed with anticipation. Crockett took the podium in a narrow briefing room and held up a single page, the kind of visual hook that made every camera operator lean in. Today, she began, I am filing a formal request for congressional hearings into the matters outlined in the FBI memorandum revealed earlier this week. These hearings will be public. The American people deserve to see the truth, not filtered through sound bites or spin. She laid out the agenda, subpoenaing senior FBI officials, demanding all unredacted pages of the memo, and calling on whistleblowers to testify under oath. Every bullet point was designed to force Trump's allies to either stand with him in the open or distance themselves. There was no middle ground left. Trump's camp, blindsided by the speed of the move, scrambled to respond. In a private meeting at his Florida estate, senior advisors argued over strategy. Some pushed for total stonewalling. Others warned that ignoring the hearings would look like guilt. Trump paced the length of the room, phone in hand, taking call after call from political allies and media contacts. The next morning, the hearing request was the lead story on every major network. Cable news graphics screamed, "Crockett demands public accountability," and "FBI probe hearings loom." The memo itself had now been entered into the congressional record, making it far harder to bury. When Trump finally made a public appearance, it was at a rally in a small Rust Belt town, a controlled environment where he could speak without facing pointed questions. But even here, signs reading, "What's in the memo?" and "Let the FBI speak" dotted the crowd. The chants in his favor were strong, but so was the undercurrent of curiosity and doubt. Back in Washington, Crockett took the floor during a televised House session. She spoke for exactly 6 minutes, every word sharpened like a blade. She reminded the chamber of the moment Trump had hesitated, of the grainy memo now etched into the public record, and of the stakes if Congress chose to look away. Her final line landed like a gavel strike. This is not politics. This is about whether the law applies equally to all of us. The chamber fell silent. Even her political opponents didn't interrupt. That night, a new clip went viral, not from a hearing, but from the street outside the Capitol. A reporter asked Crockett if she thought this would be the end of Trump's political career. She smiled faintly and replied, "This is just the first chapter." It was the kind of line that sticks, not just in headlines, but in the back of the public's mind. And for Trump, it was the worst kind of threat, one that promised the storm was far from over.